The sting of the Marvels is still fresh in Disney's mind, but as the never-ending cycle of entertainment continues, new problems arise that Disney may be intentionally ignoring.
The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
The Marvels opened to the most underwhelming box office in the history of the MCU. The $200 million plus film opened to a paltry $46 million, which is $110 million less than its predecessor, Captain Marvel. The film has Hollywood reeling and pundits scrambling as to the reasons why this failure keep on piling up. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the most prevailing reasons why the Marvels exploded on the launch pad. But before we dig through the flaming rubble, today's video is brought to you by me, Jeff Hicks, and my graphic novel, Stealing Solo. Stealing Solo asks the greatest what-if question of all time. What if a group of disgruntled Star Wars fans kidnap Harrison Ford and force him to remake Star Wars in their basement? That, and a whole lot more, is answered in Stealing Solo, a Captain's Parody. Stealing Solo has been called Laugh Out Loud Funny and the greatest Star Wars parody since Spaceballs, and it's available now for a limited time only. Go to StealingSolo.com, which is powered by Shopify, so you get the reward-winning safety and security, and get yourselves a copy today. Once we sell through this limited backstock, I'm going back to the drawing board to bring you the sequel, which parodies Luke Skywalker's fall from grace, and finally the closing chapter, which I can't wait to get to, Frankenfisher, the Bride of Solo. And yes, it's exactly what you think it is. So folks, the only way to get that is go to StealingSolo.com right now, get yourselves a copy, and enjoy the greatest Star Wars parody since Spaceballs. There's no doubt about it, The Marvels is a flop. The $200 million plus film opened to no competition last weekend. The film starring Brie Larson and her two sidekicks failed to entice audiences. Now, a few days later, people are trying to figure out why the film failed. The question of how it failed is quite obvious. It wasn't very good, and Disney themselves knew that. Behind the scenes, Marvel Studios and Disney were well aware The Marvels was in trouble before it hit the big screen. There was also recognition that Kevin Feige and his team needed the time to take stock of their theatrical tentpoles, sources tell The Hollywood Reporter. On November 8th, Bob Iger said during an earnings call that the Disney movie empire has lost focus because of an emphasis on quantity over quality, in the rush to feed Disney Plus under Bob Chapek's regime, though it was Iger himself who initiated the push before Chapek's reign. Feige and his team felt this mandate keenly, to the detriment of the Marvels movie, sources say. The film Marvel released isn't appealing to anyone. Somehow they betrayed the people who actually liked Captain Marvel. Why not simply make Captain Marvel 2? Why produce The Marvels when your audience identified, empathized, and even hero identified with Brie Larson's character, says one executive who spoke to The Hollywood Reporter. More importantly, why offer people similar or the same characters in stories that are on Disney Plus, if you expect them to go to the theater together? Disney and Marvel diluted their product, says another producer. Of course, a picture works or fails for other reasons too, but losing so much value picture over picture is rare and hard to do. Well, Marvel somehow did that. One of the big reasons the Marvels failed is because Marvel ignores their demographic. Disney was the #1 producer of female-focused entertainment. In recent history, they attempted to court the boys' market by buying up properties like the Power Rangers, Marvel, and Star Wars, but ultimately failed at all three, by trying to turn those male-centric properties into female-centric ones. Beyond the gender issue, Marvel and Disney seem to think that their films are for a much younger audience than they really are. According to tracking data for the film, just 19% of the opening weekend audience for The Marvels was between 18 and 24. 30% was 25 to 34. By comparison, 40% of the Captain Marvel audience was 18 to 24, according to data from a third-party source. Those figures suggest that much of the key audience has already aged out, which marks a sea of change. These kind of blockbusters have always been thought to be powered by teenagers and the youngest adults. The younger the audience, the worse it gets. Those ages, 13 to 17, account for only 8% of viewers for The Marvels. Yes, Kevin Feige has a lot to fix, but issues related to generational appeal are apparent in The Marvels, which includes nods to 90s nostalgia groups Nine Inch Nails and the Beastie Boys, while also featuring song and dance sequences clearly aimed at the TikTok crowd, as is a separate scene flooded with kittens. It's a real juggling act, and Marvel's marketing team was on the case. To court Gen Z, Marvel's had a partnership with YouTuber Lo-Fi Girl, and has been pumping out TikTok with clips and even some thirst trap content. A source told IndieWire that the Marvels had digital advertising at more than 100 malls and 28 markets, and trailers run before Barbie and Taylor Swift. It also may be that this dip is unique to the Marvels, not the MCU as a whole. A broader look suggests that Marvel has stayed pretty consistent for years. According to post-track data compiled by ComScore and Screen Engine, 24% of Marvel's audience for its 6 Phase 2 movies were 18 to 24. That grew to 30% for Phase 3, and then again to 32% for Phase 4. And then it started slipping a bit before The Marvels to 29%. At the same time, the 25 to 34 group had risen steadily from 18% with Phase 2 to 24% to Phase 5. The overall under 25 demo has steadily ticked down to 47%, and over 25 has risen to 53%. Female moviegoers, no matter the age, have stayed pretty consistent across each phase. Data for men suggests they've been aging out. Men under 25 were 33% of the audience in Phase 2, but Phase 5's 2 films had an audience of just 28% men under 25. A senior ComScore's analyst read on the data is that even with a few blips, Marvel's demographic makeup is still solid. Some MCU titles in that mix may make the numbers skew older, and the Avengers movies made so much money that they're outliers among the normal MCU movies. But even though he's not prepared to bet against Marvel's righting the ship in the future, they need to make sure they're not losing the 18 to 24-year-old males who appear more inclined to watch Five Nights at Freddy's. These brands have relied on the equity and goodwill built up over a decade or years. When you have a few missteps, audiences can very quickly migrate to another genre or form of entertainment, and you have to win them back. An associate professor of creative producing at Dodge College at Chapman University polled his class of 50 directing and producing students, all Gen Z, who planned to see the Marvels on opening weekend. Just 6 raised their hands. A few years ago, it would have been near unanimous, he says. Keeping up with the MCU, which requires viewing niche series as well as popular ones, can feel like a chore. Not every series is for them, and they don't want to watch the series they're not even interested in just to keep up. That's what I see with these kids watching every one of these shows as homework, and they don't want more homework out of school. They call it Endgame for a reason, one student told him. You have to take into account the aging audience and what the younger audience consumes earlier on in their life. For the 25 to 35 demographic, if that even is one, you have to remember, we all grew up watching Marvel on TV. The cartoons, then there were games, there were comic books, there were toys. You grew up with Marvel back in the 90s. 90s kids grew up with Marvel everywhere, and that translated to box office success when they were in their late teens or early 20s at the beginning of the MCU. While you do need to court that younger generation, this generation doesn't really grow up. If you look at the demographic for merchandise and toys, you'll see that a majority are older guys that continue to buy toys, not children. The same goes with comic books. A majority of comic book readers are 35 years old and older. And the average age of a video game player is in their 30s as well. While Marvel needs to appeal to everybody because of the cost of these movies, you have to remember that this aging up demographic is really the one who will spend the money because they've grown up and have been conditioned to spend money on this type of entertainment. Comics, toys, video games, it's all one big Venn diagram. In the middle, where they all cross over, is that sacred 25 to 35 age group, mostly male, who are consuming and spending the money on these things because it's a top priority and it's always been. The audience Marvel chose to chase was the wrong one, as the resulting byproduct was a massive flop for the Marvels. The majority of viewers are older, and while they have more brand loyalty, they're less likely to return to the MCU after a stinker like the Marvels. It's perplexing how a massive corporation like Disney failed to get this right, unless this was always their intention. Based on other data released this week, 61% of the audience was male and 39% female. Yet this film, The Marvels, was created for Disney's sweet spot audience, girls. This goes beyond Marvel, as Star Wars did the same thing. Except instead of making the film light and fluffy, Star Wars pulled the old Kathleen Kennedy maneuver.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
When a product costs over $200 million to produce, you want as many eyes on it. And when your audience is over 60% male, it would be wiser to make something that will appeal to the majority as opposed to the minority. You think Warner Brothers was worried about how many men would go see Barbie? No. Knowing your audience is crucial because it allows you to cater to the specific audience's preference as well as interests. The result is a more engaging and more valuable experience which resonates with that audience. The Marvels landed with a thud. The audience that would show up for other Marvel movies didn't show up. Other reasons include the glut of content to watch before the show. Some accuse the Disney Plus series of being more damaging than good. More on that in a future video. Others blame character choice. All of that is fair and valid, but there is another reason, a more nefarious reason that's turning off audiences, and it could be the biggest culprit. You may have heard this one before, but we like to give all sides an equal platform here. That reason is the dreaded W word. While there are always more reasons as to why something is terrible, this time it ties into Marvel's myopic view of their audience. Yeah, the woke idea of making all superheroes a group of fully diverse females beating up people as if they're guys was based on the assumption that there's an audience for that. The problem is, the audience these producers and directors think exists doesn't. That's because your audience doesn't think like your average Hollywood producer. Audiences want a good movie, not phony virtue signaling with a bunch of elitist PC asswipes trying to appeal to a group of select outraged activists. Or as we like to say on the channel, the people on Twitter. You want proof? It's in the numbers. Has anyone noticed that women flock to see Barbie, but not the Marvels? Barbie made $1 billion acknowledging that women would go see a movie about a doll. A doll. They all wanted to see a movie about a doll because whoever made it must have actually had a childhood and recognized that biology dictates preferences and most girls, left alone, play with dolls. Well, some guys too, but those dolls are made in Japan and need to be inflated. Sure, Barbie mentioned the patriarchy a few times, but that was so the producers could check the woke boxes, but women flocked to it and they loved it, even if the inspiration for the character was made out of more plastic than your average Kardashian. So The Marvels is the biggest bomb yet, and Disney loses millions pretending women would pay to see it. It's the cinematic equivalent of a Brian Kilmeade book. Nobody's buying it as it turns out. Thank God women and men aren't attracted to a movie with a message that has no creative or artistic value. Propaganda is like porn, you know it when you see it. So as long as Hollywood puts woke before a decent script, with good dialogue and a solid plot, memorable characters, audiences are just going to skip it. And skip it they did. The Marvels has less of a message than Captain Marvel by a lot, but Captain Marvel hurt this film. It conditioned audiences to expect these films to be a certain way because Marvel themselves acted a certain way. Their ego before Endgame was at an all-time high. They thought nothing could fail because nothing did. But now that that load has been blown, everyone's in the post-coital afterglow, and we realize it's not as good as it used to be. The agenda was strong with the first Captain Marvel. It was as woke as they come. Disney bought into its own hype and produced this film, The Marvels. But as we said earlier, Disney knew there wasn't an audience for more of that content. But the film, Captain Marvel, was sandwiched between the biggest cliffhanger since The Empire Strikes Back and the biggest film of all time in Avengers Endgame. Anything in that window would be successful. Look at Ant-Man 2. That film was a big hit. The third one, big shit. The Endgame bump was real, and it got Marvel higher than the pure Colombian snow that Tony Montana was peddling. At the end of the day, the failure of the Marvels falls between all of this. Marvel failed to acknowledge their real audience. They wanted to court the younger female demographic that doesn't really like their films anymore. When the MCU was the cultural event of the season, Marvel was in high demand. After Endgame, they're not. The die-hard fans stuck around, but were given lackluster films about characters that no one liked. Add on to the fact that those characters were poorly written, woke, and stupid, further hurt the brand. Yes, wokeness has hurt the MCU as a whole, but The Marvels is less woke trash than it is just trash. It's a silly film with a star that wore out her welcome before the first film. The film The Marvels won't rebound, but the Marvel brand may. The audience that Marvel is so desperately chasing is going to go see another film this weekend, The Hunger Games. And that'll probably be more successful in the long run. There's only one Marvel movie next year, Deadpool 3, which will be a hit because the Deadpool audience isn't just MCU fans. It's comic book fans, it's Fox Marvel fans, it's a lot bigger. But if Deadpool 3 fails, then Marvel is done. Everything is riding on the multiverse, and while there are an infinite amount of realities out there, the only one Marvel needs to worry about is this one, where they've lost their audience. So folks, what do you think is the real reason that the Marvels has shit the bed? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you think it's the wokeness? Do you think it's the bad scripting? Do you think it's the audience? Do you think it's the demographic? Do you think it's the fact that you have to watch 47 hours of Disney Plus content? Had I not watched WandaVision, I wouldn't have figured out who Captain Rambeau was. Of course, the flashbacks in the Marvel shows you, but the whole blip and how she got her powers and all those other wonderful things that aren't that wonderful, you gotta watch the shows for that. Marvel's trying to figure out how to replicate the comic book mentality of, you want to find this out? Buy the comic book. But back in the day, it was dropping 60 cents, 80 cents, $1, $3, $5 to figure out the story. Not only do you have to drop $20 for Disney Plus now, you got to invest 6 to 12 hours. Time is way more valuable than $5 to $10. So Marvel, it would be smart if you gave out free comic books at your movies and had a little window of time before the movie starts to have audiences read the books to get caught up. You could have wonderful art, you could have a story, it's a Marvel story, so today it's not that great, but you could have something to fill audiences in that only takes about 35 seconds. The TikTok generation that you want to cater to isn't going to watch 12 hours of content. They want to watch 35 seconds of something and move on to the next one. So either build a film that required little to no previewing so they can get that audience in there, or focus on the audience that is willing to spend money and time on your merchandise and your shows and your brand as a whole. It's really quite simple. I'm surprised that $1 billion company has allowed themselves to get this far into the weeds. Bob Iger's right, but then again, Bob Iger's trying to just fix his own mistake. They have worried about quantity over quality. I can't name a great mainline MCU film in a while. Spider-Man is a Sony picture, and that's not that great, it just has a great finale. Avengers Endgame is a good closing chapter to the entire thing, so trying to stretch that out? I don't know. So folks, let me know what you think down in the comments below, but if you're hungry for more quality comic book content, go to stealingsolo.com and get the graphic novel that people are calling laugh out loud funny and the best Star Wars parody since Spaceballs. It features a group of disgruntled Star Wars fans who kidnap Harrison Ford and force him to remake Star Wars in their basement. It features that and a whole lot more in Stealing Solo, a Captain's parody. The website is powered by Shopify, so you get the reward safety and security, and I ship out books all the time. I go to the post office about 3 times a week. So folks, go to stealingsolo.com, get yourselves a copy, and tag us on social media when you get the book and let us know what you think. I'll be back next time with more. I'd like to thank and welcome all of our new subscribers. The channel's been growing, so thank you folks. Welcome. WCBS is on its way to 200K, and when we do, it's a whole new WCBS in a way that you want. So folks, thank you for watching. Be smart, be safe, be cool, but always be excellent to each other. Thanks for watching today's video. Yes, it's over, but don't cry because there's more, a lot more from World Class Bullshitters. And there's only one way to get it. Hit that subscribe button below. When you do that, you'll get notifications and updates from World Class Bullshitters every time we go live. Basically, you won't miss anything. And if there's one thing I hate, it's FOMO. But the thing most people hate more than FOMO is fear of missing out on World Class Bullshitters, because there's just some things you can't undo. So folks, do yourselves a favor and never miss anything from World Class Bullshitters. One last thing before you go, hit the thumbs up button. Not for our egos, no, they're big enough as this, but it does help us fight the algorithm here, and well, it's man versus machine, and that's the real fight. But if that's not your battle, that's okay. There's one last way you can help WCBS, and that's going over to shopwcbs.com, picking up a t-shirt, a beer glass, a sweatshirt, a poster, all sorts of ways to back WCBS. The difference between us and other YouTube channels is I'm the artist that makes all this stuff, so if you enjoy art beyond t-shirts, you can even read our comic books. We got it all. We're called the epitome of pop culture for a reason, and no, again, it's not for our egos. So folks, make sure you're involved with every aspect of World Class Bullshitters, not just for us, but do it for yourself. We're making the change in entertainment everybody out there wants to see. And a special thank you goes out to all of our wonderful patrons who make this content possible. Go to patreon.com/worldclassbs to get involved and help out the channel.